second question is, we're all guilty on some level. And I think this is, part of the struggle. We all participate in some level of systems that may or may not align with our values. And whether that's intentional or unintentional. And so, how do you navigate that? How do you hold yourself accountable when you feel like harm happens that may be rooted in some form of inequality or bias? And, some of the examples that came up were misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, racism, xenophobia. I know this is all new lexicon, right? Anti-blackness, ableism. But this idea of causing harm, because I was like, Pat, can we sort of how do we define causing harm? And it's really like we deny an opportunity or we support the denial of an opportunity to someone else rooted in an implicit or an explicit bias. And so ways that we feel like we may be participating in the kinds of systems of inequality that that don't align with our values. Like, how are we participating and how do we struggle and work through that? And what do we do? And just anybody, I think we're going back to Madi now. Yeah. If you want to start to dive in, like, what's that like for you?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely participated in those systems. Absolutely. In some cases consciously and in some cases unconsciously. And truth be told, it happens even now. I'm not perfect. And like Jay said, I'm always learning, I'm always adding to what I know and who I want to be in the world. And I think, for me, it's important to, one, if it happens now, I feel like in this moment, I'm kind of hyper aware and hypersensitive to the systems of oppression and how I participate. And I think what's helpful is I have a great group of people around me that if I say something or do something inappropriate, they're like, yo, girl, come here. Like, we need to have a conversation. I'm like, okay. I also, if I see someone who is a friend or family or whomever, yo, girl, we got to have a conversation. And that's what I feel like that is how I kind of combat these systems. And I think about like my family members, specifically like nieces and nephews, and my partner has children, and how I talk about things to help them possibly see from a different frame. And thinking about ways to do that isn't kind of beating them over the head with like, you shouldn't say that and here's why, or you should do this and here's why, but really pointing out examples in the moment. So that way it's more real and tangible, because I feel like that is the best way for people to learn. What I'm becoming really aware of in these times, so much more so than I wasn't before, are microaggressions. And microaggressions in terms of,
what are microaggressions? Define again. I want to just invite us to keep lifting up new language here.
Well, for me, it's, I was listening to someone have a conversation the other day with, I was sitting outside of a hotel, and someone was having a conversation. The one person happened to be a white man. The other person happened to be a black man. And they're having this conversation of like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm doing this and that and the other. And the black gentleman was talking about how he was hosting this, fundraiser in this road race. And the white gentleman said to him, well, for what organization? And it was some major company. And he was like VP of X. And the white gentleman said, wow, like you speak very articulately. And what was missing, that hit was like a gut punch, because I'm like, what he meant to say and what he didn't say was, you speak very articulately for a black man. So the assumption is that because I am a particular person, because I'm a person of color, a particular person of color, or male or female, or however we're identifying, there's kind of that piece that is left off, which is that underlying kind of thing that people are trying to point out. Like, and to use a personal example for myself, I met someone the other day and they said, oh, what nationality are you? And again, like Pat, I knew the question they were asking, and I said Mexican American, and they were like, oh, wow, that's great. And, how long have you been here? And, I said, I'm like fourth generation. Oh, and, so we're talking, my age comes up. I'm 40, I think I'm 42, 43. I have to double check those numbers. But they said, oh, so how many children do you have? Not do you have children? How many children do you have? And I said, I don't have any children. Well, how did you go this far? Like, and essentially, like, it's just something that because I'm Mexican American and of a certain age, I'm supposed to have children. And this was from a Latin woman, so it's the expectations also within the communities of which we live, and those, and how those kind of microaggressions happen or are spoken, and it's not even kind of a blip on the screen. And sometimes it happens and I'll walk away from a conversation feeling some kind of way, and it'll take me like 10 to 15 minutes of going, oh, that's why I'm feeling some kind of way, because this person was asking these questions based on who they thought I should be, based on what society tells them I should be, based on the lies that we've all bought into. And so, yeah, I think we need a glossary at the end of this, because I don't know that I explained microaggressions, but yeah, that's what my experience has been around kind of where I am now, and what I do to acknowledge what I've done, and also what steps I take to help prevent that in the future with myself and people around me.
Thank you, Mari. Thank you so much there. The thing I do want to just say to this team is that we should be making notes about things we want to go deeper on. To Pat's, and I would say that this conversation is an opportunity to go deeper, as well as the note to the glossary, for sure. Jay?
Cool. Thank you. So, some people don't like that I say this, but this is the way that I feel. And, I feel like, again, white as a social construct, but white is real in this country right now. If white people, including myself, could just accept that we're actually all racist and start from that place, and then move into how can we become less racist, more conscious, more aware, it'd just be a whole lot easier. And the reason why I say that is because the racism impacts people of color and white people. And even though white people have white privilege and unearned benefits because of our skin color, there are still the shadow side of white privilege, which is that we are socialized in a container that constantly tells us, consciously and unconsciously, that we are better. And that's how we're socialized. And so we're socialized in a compound of superiority. So I mess up all the time. And the most dangerous part of white privilege is that it's the blinders. So like most of the time with everyday white folk, it's unintentional and unconscious. But because this is how we've been socialized, then we don't even know when we are doing microaggressions, these small things like every day that hurt other people, when we're saying the wrong thing that hurt other people, and we're saying or doing things and acting in a way that is consistent with privilege. So, my whole thing is like, I mess up every day. How I hold myself accountable is when I become aware of it, I say it out loud, I make amends where I can, and understand that the amends that I make may or may not have the desired impact, and that I have to live with that. And then I pledge to do better. Because I'm a human being, and I'm flawed, and I have good things and I have other things, and I want to have a certain quality of life that includes loving myself. So, to have love present, then I also have to be able to see my humanness and to say, I made a mistake, I'm going to make amends, and I'm going to do better. And that's the best that I can do as a human being. And not then carry that into shame or guilt or baggage that then I'm heavy because I'm always wrong. Because listen, I can't change the fact that I was born into this body, into this skin, into how I appear. I can't change any of that. And I'm not going to feel guilty about it. What I am going to do is acknowledge our society and what this skin and this body means, and do my best to make sure that other people and the planet have equal opportunity like I have because of our skin and the body we're in. And that, and that's all I can do, and it doesn't help anybody if I'm living in shame or guilt or pain. That doesn't help me, it doesn't help my family, and it certainly doesn't help folks of color if I'm disempowered, sad, and guilty all the time. So to wrap it up real quick and with a little bow, although it may feel controversial, I think why I present this to white folks is that if we can just start there, then we don't have to do all of the back and forth about but I'm not this, but I'm not this, but I'm not this. And we spend so much energy there that we can't get to the action of undoing racism. And that's really what we need to do. And for white folks, I'm included in this. This is our job here on this planet because we did inherit that and we are part of that, no matter what anybody says. So our duty is to undo that to the best of our ability every single day. And that's part of us becoming fully human. So I hope that's, anyway, that's my contribution. And I say it with love, and I love myself and I love white folks. I don't hate white people. I don't hate myself. And I know we can do more. And that's what I'm committed to. And I hope other white folks are committed as well.
So powerful, Jay. So, again, I'm about to turn to the next person, but the thing that I want to flag is there's a lot of rage for white people around this conversation. And, again, this may be a place where we get to go deeper, but there's a lot of rage. And where are those spaces where people can unpack what the rage is? Because the minute you sort of hurl that accusation of racist, all hell breaks loose. No matter where people stand on the, no matter where people are on the continuum, and people will argue, that it's the conversation, it's the ultimate conversation closer rather than opener. And you're saying this should be the conversation opener. So I just want to underscore that and say, wow, there's more to unpack there. Okay, I want to keep it moving in the interest of time and open it up for Monica. Same question, so we all participate.
Yeah.
How do you hold yourself accountable when you cause harm? Where do you see you struggle as it relates to, those dynamics?
So I just want to acknowledge Jay for always speaking the truth, even when it's ugly, funky, stinky, nasty, yucky. It is, it's her truth, and it is a universal truth, and we either accept it, reject it, or we do whatever we do with it. For me, I've been, one of the things that I had to learn to do was separate the group activities and events and behaviors from the individual person who's in front of me. Because I have white folks in my family, and I have a biracial people in our family, and I don't want them, I love them. And so how do I reconcile the historic group stuff that has happened and is still happening, and hold that as part of and separate from my personal one-on-one experience of that individual? It's like having some kind of mental illness because it doesn't go together, and yet it is to hold the multiple truths of the reality is what I've been called to do. So, and then understand why my stepfather, who's European, born and raised in Norway, and came here and faced all kind of oppression as a foreigner, and then married this Black woman. Oh my God. Then he got a double whammy, and he still can't quite get it because his training says people in authority are good and they make the rules so that everyone can be safe. And he can't hear that that's not true in every case. And so he's in a schizophrenic kind of place because of what's been going on in recent years with all of the police shootings and the uprisings and the protests. He's in a crazy place because it goes against all the things that he was taught, where he grew up and lived in a pretty much a monolithic environment where everybody looked like him. Well, they might have had blonde hair, he had brown hair, like, and so it's very challenging. And I think what's helpful is to be in diverse environments and have really major conversations, real conversations. Like when I'm a Southern girl basically, and I went to New York, and when I committed to being in the theater, I had a bunch of conversations around, well, what is gay and why, what does that mean? And how does that work? And I, had a lot of beautiful friends, male and female, who would allow me to engage in that conversation in my ignorance and to understand, at least attempt to understand and not judge when I'm heterosexual. And, my new challenges are around youthism. Like, I don't tolerate any more millennial bashing because they're beautiful, fabulous, amazing, and they're the future. So how do we take, as other, who live in other generational places, see the beauty and value that this next generation brings, instead of doing what was done to us and saying, oh, they're this and they're that, because every generation gets that from the generation before, and we get a chance to break that cycle if we choose. And bumping into ageism, as I age and my friends are older, who are even older than me, can't get employment or don't have opportunities because of their age or their mobility, and how that is impacting their well-being in terms of being able to make a living and make a contribution. And then I think the thing that is new, and I tread so carefully and respectfully around, is gender fluidity. That's the learning edge I'm on, is around that, like accepting it, respecting that, listening and learning about what that means and what all of the things that happen to people who are in some fluid place around their gender identity and are making choices to support who their spirit calls them to be. And that's, way out of what anything my parents ever thought to have me be open to. So I think we get to hold space for each person's humanity that comes in front of us, and be forgiving of our own mistakes and ask for forgiveness of mistakes we make out of not knowing. We get to move away from judgment of ourselves and others in each interaction, in each encounter. And we get to choose how we, like, the privilege is we get to choose when and how we do the work around some identity that we don't have. So, as a Black woman in America, there's stuff I don't get to choose. I just got to deal with it. But as a heterosexual woman who's educated and owns a business, I got privileges and I get to choose how to deal with other stuff when I want to deal with it. I remember, and this will be the last thing I say, like what really sunk in about my own privilege, because was when my kids were in school and I could show up, and I found, like, oh, if I show up in my yoga pants with a headscarf on, I get treated one way. If I show up in my business suit, sporting my business card that says president, it's a whole nother world. So I learned to like show up dressed to the nines and say, what the hell is going on? And I had the privilege to show up when they're there in the middle of the day versus I would lose my job if I leave before 6 o'clock. And that's a privilege. You know, being educated is a privilege. Everybody doesn't have that opportunity. And to be second generation college educated and Ivy League educated is not common, period, much less for somebody who's Black or of color. So how do we hold our own privileges in our different places, whether they're economic or some social status, and have compassion and understanding for, you know, the privileges that other people don't have. You know, like I got cousins that live in the projects. I got cousins who are poor and grew up in shotgun houses. You know, that's what they have in Louisiana. You know, and I have folks who in my family who are very wealthy, and everything in between, and every color in the rainbow. And so how do I honor and love and hold who they are in high esteem and with respect, and everyone who I encounter? It's hard. It's not easy work. It takes some thoughtfulness.
Thank you. Okay. Take that minute and let's just take that in. And you all, I know this time is hard. I just want to say, I know 2.5 minutes can seem like an eternity for some people and the blink of an eye for others. So I'm doing my best to manage while still holding the power of what you all are expressing. Okay, Pat.
Yeah, in terms of holding myself accountable, you know, it was really game changing for me when I started learning about privilege and oppression, and really doing the deep dive on myself. Because I think on the surface level, especially in social justice, you know, community, as like a financially unstable, previously financially unstable Black trans man, who suffers from a number of physical disabilities, like it can seem like, oh, you got to tiptoe around me, and like I can say whatever I want, but this isn't true at all, because it's just there's so much at play. And I specifically think, you know, as a joke, like who's held me accountable most has been like femmes of color, whether cisgender or transgender, have really checked me and acknowledged where my privilege is at. And what I do in terms of my own accountability is understanding that I have to do the work. I can't rely on them. And I think that happens very often in spaces like, you know, I'm sitting here in a room, like look at who the conversation is, and knowing like when we were talking earlier, I didn't put myself first because I know like I'm the masculine one. I didn't want to see that, just like Jay didn't want herself forward. So I really try to be mindful of where my privileges show up. And especially knowing that it is going to be consistently femmes of color who will hold me accountable, then what can I do in our relationship that it doesn't become so much of a burden to them, but they see me as someone they care about to check in with me and make me accountable, as opposed to it feeling like an emotional burden that they shouldn't have to carry, that it seems equal. Like when they hold me in, I'm doing some emotional work for them at the same time, so that it's not always this process of someone having to check me over and over and over. Because I think there is a capacity of which we're able to give ourselves to hold people accountable. I know for myself, I don't hold everyone accountable for things because I don't have the energy to constantly hold people accountable. So I try to be mindful of the people in my circle, in my life, who hold me accountable, that I'm giving something back to them so that it's not constantly me draining energy from them all the time. And I think, you know, the most important things in terms of accountability is like learning to be okay with being wrong, because we're all wrong. I used to be a very, very sensitive child. And when someone told me wrong, I would show up immediately. But as an adult, like that was something I didn't like feeling anymore. So I was like, okay, Pat, you've got to undo this, because if you want to do this work, you're going to be called out and in consistently. So you need to be able to accept that and really sit in it and listen to it when it hurts. And I think that's been one of the biggest lessons I've also learned in accountability, is just sitting in the discomfort and being like, this is part of it and this is part of the work, and actually learning to enjoy it, because, you know, I work out. Any type of, you know, pain is actually causing damage to muscles that will then cause it to repair bigger and stronger than before. So I think in terms of my own emotional pain, when I feel that pain, I know this is a growing edge that I need to sit in and deal with, and that I'm going to be a better person. And when I've hold myself to that, like, the accountability process has been better for me to hold myself accountable. And I think other people to hold me accountable too, and then not feel unbalanced.
Yeah, powerful, powerful. Thank you. I want to just check in again as we complete this round, Dana, to just see if there's anything that you want to give voice to, and you could say no, it's completely okay. And then I'm going to share a really small story around this one for me.
I have a small tidbit, you know, in terms of how I'm personally learning. I think the easiest way to describe it is it's much like a, you know, wild pig in a china store. I'm running into the wall to know that it's there. So, you know, it's not always pretty, but the intent is there. And I think that that's a critical thing to identify when you see other people, you know, learning. And, you know, one of the books that I think was most profoundly in my summer research project, the book Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. And before I lose someone, I wouldn't claim myself to be a full-on feminist. But what I like about that book is that she applies these observations to pop culture and modern day happenings. So it's easier to understand this world because she makes it relatable. And I think too, the other thing that I think is it's an emotion and an action that I think is one of the most important things for a human in general is to be empathetic. And I think that even if one doesn't agree with certain concepts that are being presented, that as a person, to really put yourself in another person's shoes is a really good thing. And to be able to really do that and to do it 2 feet in, not 1 foot out and 1 foot in, I think is it's important to do. The other thing too, I think is possibly worth mentioning is, you know, like Ra had started this question explaining like how there are certain words and terms and phraseology, you know, white supremacy was the example that she had brought up, that can be sort of like igniting a stick of dynamite for a lot of white people and people in general even. And so, you know, even if people aren't buying into the words, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not buying into the concept. So for example, I don't buy into the term woke, but I'll buy into the word aware. I don't necessarily buy into the word privilege. I'll easily buy into the word advantage. And so I think when you're having these conversations with people who are trying to learn, it's something good to keep in mind.
Thank you, Dana. So for me, mine is just going to be a story. Because Pat, I remember when I saw this question, I was like, ooh, because it's a tough question. And, you know, this has been a really challenging month for me. And you all know this, you know, transparently as a team, just what it is to hold this team in all of our incredible diversity, with the commitment to hold the team as a team in all of our incredible diversity. And it's really, quite frankly, been kicking my ass, which I will be talking more about in my Facebook Live. But the example I want to give for me is really a profound one, because it stayed with me and it's still with me, and it was really, really humbling. You know, I've been doing a lot of traveling, as you all know, and I was coming back from my time off the grid, and a lot of what I'd been sort of in this sort of internal dialogue about was this conversation of assumptions, Pat, right? Like, where are these places where we make assumptions about people and how we participate in these systems of domination and inequality through our assumptions a lot of times. Nadia, thinking about your example, you know, in terms of what does it mean to be a Chicana, you know, in her 40s with no children, you know, and that being seen in the way that it's being seen as a sort of an oxymoron, right? And I had ordered a Lyft, and the Lyft driver pulled up, and he did not get out of the car to put my bag in the trunk, and I happen to have a big bag. And I was like, already in my head, like, what? Like, he's not getting out the car? Like, I'm a woman with a big bag? You know, like, I had all this stuff, all this privilege shit in my head about why he should have gotten out of the car to put my bag in the trunk. And I glanced at the car, like, as I put my bag in huffily and sort of slammed the car down, and I noticed the wheelchair icon on his license plate. And when I got in the car, he turned to me, apologetic. I'm disabled, and that was why I couldn't help you with your bag, miss. I'm so sorry. And I looked down, and he had no legs. Like, the car had been rigged in a way so that he could drive it. So here I am in my head with all my garbage about why he couldn't assist me, and the man had no legs. And it went from, like, my internal dialogue went from, wow, I'm going to give him a lousy review and let Lyft know and they should be making sure that their people get out of the car, to, holy fucking shit, how awesome is Lyft that they create opportunities for people. You know what I mean? And I don't even know this man's story. You know, we wanted to talk about something else, so we talked about whatever he wanted to talk about. But I don't know his story, but my point is that just in that moment, I felt like a total asshole, like a total, complete asshole. And I was like, oh, right. Yesterday's transformation is today's ego trip. Keep learning. Keep learning. So that's mine.